I am feeling some very big feelings this morning. How do I verbalize them? What do I tell you about them? Let's try to proceed in the most basic possible way. In 2015 and 2016, I was discovering that some of the modalities employed by Planet Waves FM and Eric Francis Coppolino were crucial to the safety of community environments where I was submitted to violence that was ignored or denied by all members of the communities that I was in, where part of what powerfully facilitated me in maintaining a sense of myself through violence that was meant to stop me from being able to communicate about any of this. These shared tool sets for emotional processing, spiritual processing, coming to a sense of self, knowing oneself, recognizing one's own self in relationship with others rather than being subsumed. In 2015 or 2016, Eric was talking about media integrity, journalism integrity in certain ways that really appealed to me and turned out to be some of what I had to really fight to stay in contact with when I was cut off from communications with Planet Waves and could not find any other organization speaking and demonstrating commitment to those principles. My attempts to get involved with Planet Waves 2015, early 2016. By early 2016, things had already gone very awry. At some point in 2015, I was constructing my plan for being more closely affiliated with an organization that I found to be producing very powerful, very relevant materials. But I didn't get to communicate very much about that before I was derailed. And what derailed me was deeply inherently part of the entire landscape that I was already evaluating in regards to safety and what resourcing was needed. I was reaching out to be involved in Planet Waves' form of journalism. I was reaching out to support a media platform that was demonstrating integrity of a kind that I was not finding elsewhere. I was very severely, life-threateningly affected by the effects of environmental contaminants in such a way that I came to be sex trafficked. From a certain point onwards, my experience was of being continuously, repeatedly tortured to death in a closet. And it was while being repeatedly, continuously tortured to death in a closet in 2017, without having had any respite from the violence that had been occurring. Only the kind of violence would change, but the level of violence would not. And so I don't know exactly how to describe to you what it's like to be tortured to death over and over and over again, and have that be your reality for the long term, to go on not only for days or weeks, but months, and not just months, but years. Others have experienced this and are experiencing this longer than I have, and I can barely verbalize it. In 2017, I think this is correct, Planet Waves called attention to Chiron Return's work with the gemstone file, which is more or less referencing the same documentation as the poison papers, but the gemstone file presented keys, Chiron keys, to looking at this massive amount of documentation that many people would have they would have no idea where to start. And so there was at least one article, and there was a Planet Waves FM broadcast, and then I think there were other references, but my recall is kind of what it is. When I came into contact with this in 2017, I was at that time already working with other survivors in our own particular severely neurologically injured way, in a state of very intense invisibility, recognizing together that the research that was gathered into the gemstone file, the poison papers, provided major elements of what then became our understanding about how we had been poisoned by environmental contaminants, and how many of the influences involved were not unaware of the kinds of things that could occur, and that research had been fraudulently manipulated on that basis. What I was trying to be in contact with Planet Waves about in 2015, 2016. In 2016, once I experienced a certain form of trafficking, I was trying to get in touch with Planet Waves for a variety of reasons having to do with the shocking nature of how it could be possible that I could be trafficked from a circumstance like the one that I was in. And part of that was awareness of environmental contaminants, but it did not have the additional specific points that were provided by the poison papers. I had never heard of the poison papers before the gemstone file, so I'm using those phrases a little bit synonymously, and that may not be entirely accurate, but I'm repairing memory circuits. In 2015, when I was working on Planet Waves stuff, I was spending so much of my time organizing myself to be of benefit to this organization, because I needed them to do more of the work that they were already doing. I needed them to recognize how important the work that they were doing was. I think that they did recognize that, but they did not recognize it from my perspective and from the perspective of people that I have been working with. And that's sort of funny for me to say now, because that was then and this is now, and we know so much more now, and it's very intense in the body to experience that understanding, to realize that so many of these intersections come together in such particular ways. It reveals to us a responsibility that we have. How do we engage with what we know on this basis? for Intuitive Public Radio, what that is that all of these circumstances that survivors have been enduring, the violence going on in these communities is largely being caused by, catalyzed, facilitated by ambient environmental infiltration. So we say entrainment to reference all of the different ways that your body and your memory and your neurological function and a lot of things are influenced by the different media and technology in all our environments that has come to be so ubiquitous that we may not even really recognize what it is. We don't know how it works. It's somebody else's expertise. We're doing this other thing that we know about, but we don't know about that. When our environments are filled with that kind of technology, and that technology is being run by organizations that are either engaged in human trafficking or have known associations with human trafficking, we are going to be influenced in ways that cause conflict and confusion, and we're not going to understand what that could possibly be unless we look at the ambient environmental entrainment. Our environments have been infiltrated by entrainment that seeks to control us so that we will serve the lucrative serve the lucrative purposes of unfortunate interests. Intuitive Public Radio exists because we had to build ambient de-entrainment infrastructure. And part of how we came to our understanding about ambient de-entrainment infrastructure was recognizing, for me, what were the recovery resources that just being part of the Planet Waves community gave me. I was paying for a membership, but I think it was the lowest tier, and then I wasn't even able to pay for that anymore. But it wasn't even so much about the paying membership, and there are things that we can discuss about that. But what it was that I was interacting with a community that was able to address certain intersections in calm and productive and caring ways. And although there's stuff behind a paywall, there are all of these different relationship-based ways of coming into contact with different content. So when a platform makes it clear that you can reach out and ask for a discount, or you can reach out and say, hey, I'm in a particular position, is there a way that I can access this? That's a relational form of, how do I want to say it? It's energy exchange. We could say it's commercial, but I don't know if that would really be the right word. A lot of business and capitalism and commercial exploits have tended to remove the relational aspects of energy exchange. If you replace relationality between living beings with an artificial sense of relationality, it does not nourish the bodies in the same way, and it provides false cues. Even if you try to do it perfectly, you still end up with false cues that this is physiology, the way we communicate with one another. My body and your body are connected through the world that we both are in. The sounds we exchange, the breathing air in and out, exosomal excretions in clouds around our bodies. There are so many different ways that bodies communicate that don't ever need to involve touching bodies directly. it is physiological, the effects between me and you, when I listen to you and I come to understand more about your life and how I can best respect you. And when you listen to me and you hear the particular tones that I use and the emotions that I seem to be expressing, and there are lots of other cues that you can pick up depending on if we're using something electronic or if we're in a physical space in person. All of these things affect how much we are nourished by our social interactions. And if our social interactions are all mediated by technology that presents a deceptive form of the nutrients that we feel we're reaching out for. I'm reaching out for a connection with others in a social way, but that means something to my body. It means something to bodies in physical spaces together that is very, very different if you have the electronic or the internet intermediary. We realized early on that we had to provide this kind of infrastructure in order for anyone in the environment to be able to make their own decisions, because so many people have not just been entrained in a simple way, but have layers and layers and layers of entrainment, and then often also multi-generationally, where what people have been having to endure in their environments has been so consistently low-level abusive. Like if you look at this is the Poison Papers, if you look at the research, if you look at the gemstone file, and that's where I learned this originally, the very low levels of contaminants in the environment, or in whatever case, kept being shrugged off, said that, but this is such a small amount, it wouldn't be a problem. But then what was shown out in some of that research was that there are worse, different problems caused by long-term continued low dose exposure to whatever contaminant that we're talking about. And so there's a similar mechanism where we're getting continuous low dose effects of entrainment through all of these different ways, all of these different things in our lives, our families, our workplaces, stuff that's marketed to us in all of these different ways, stuff that travels epigenetically, what I'm experiencing, what my mother experienced, what her mother experienced, and lots of other things that can affect how that works. Essentially, we need to be aware of the kinds of entrainment strategies that perpetrator networks are using, and we need to make sure to fill those gaps in any environment that we're in so that the trafficking pathways cannot operate. So we have to fill our spaces with media, public media, for instance, that is explicitly supportive of and in recognition of the most severely disabled and severely affected survivors of human trafficking and invisible violence. Because everywhere else, the environmental entrainment is committed to keeping us from being noticed or acknowledged. When we search for examples of people who are doing this, we don't find them. We have some examples. This person's doing a portion of this, and this group is doing this different thing, but it's like this, and that's really helpful for this reason. But we tend to have to choose pieces from many, many different places in order to illustrate what we're talking about. One of the exceptions to that, and it's a strong exception, is Planet Waves, because the way that Planet Waves materials are structured are really inherently supportive of building this kind of infrastructure. A lot of the materials that are needed are already in what Planet Waves is producing. And part of what Planet Waves is producing is not only these kinds of media materials, it's also very specific subjects. For instance, they're decoding the COVID situation in a very effective way, in a way that is apparently so effective that it gets them targeted. I'm sure they've been targeted before, but in this case, they took down the COVID chronology, which infuriated me, but I had already saved a copy, which is great. But we need survivors of the most invisible violence who are not welcome or safe in almost any environment. We need Chiron return and Planet Waves to do this work and keep doing this kind of journalism with this kind of integrity, producing this kind of public media. Chiron return being committed to the training of journalists and researchers. We need these kinds of journalists and researchers. And we need the infrastructure that allows us to connect more effectively to these journalists and researchers, because we've been barely able to communicate directly with Planet Waves just because of the situations we're in, and not everybody can use Telegram. So how do we bring all of our resourcing to asking people to support this kind of organization so that we can slowly build our efforts together and be acting more cooperatively, more collaboratively on all of these subjects, because it is of crucial importance and there is no substitute for it. And there are a lot of other subjects that I would like to mention, but I think that the conclusion of this, I'm gonna get it in under half hour. The conclusion of this, I think, right now, today, is that near the end of the April 1st, 2022 Planet Waves FM broadcast, Eric is talking about, he is inviting others into this discussion of journalism, this way of learning about journalism. He said, reach out to us. Let's talk about how maybe we create some kind of internship. And the energy in me, I actually gave him a call, but it didn't pick up that time. And maybe that's better because now I'm recording this video. I am feeling a real full body shock about how this was where I was in 2015, recognizing the importance of this, and then the extreme physical violence that has happened for almost all of the intervening time, not even being able to access enough of my own neurology, not being able to repair what was wiped out. And coming back to this now and having so much more. I mean, I guess I got, it's sort of like I got a really great download that required me to be tortured to death for some years in order to be able to communicate about this now. Great download. What we've been doing since 2015 is striving to create a network internship process, but we would never use the word internship at this point. We tend to use the word co-mentorship, and we say a lot of other things too. But to have a supportive, multimodal learning environment that allows people to connect and really engage with a kind of community training in journalism and in research and in public media. This is what we have had to work and fight to offer to survivors of the worst kinds of invisible violence, who are being very intentionally separated from any aspect of media privilege or social authority. And just to be talking about these things together in ways that these survivors can access means that we bring back a tremendous amount of the power that has been taken from all of us. I hope you will visit planetwaves.fm and take a look at Eric's work. It's good. I'll say more later. I've said enough for the moment. I'm going to breathe and be very still. I promise to return for further comment. I will add one more piece. I notice my thoughts becoming slightly more organized. The network learning about journalism and research is partly, yes, about public media, journalism, and research, but primarily it's about the kinds of circumstances that survivors encounter in their immediate locations that are the effects of the ubiquitous ambient environmental entrainment. And that is, what is the capacity of the people around them to ensure that communication is happening? When people are very severely intersectionalized, they are often prevented from communicating with the people around them, even if it looks to someone else looking at the situation like people are communicating. People may still not be communicating. One of the things that so profoundly is needed is a form of ambient and direct community and family and interpersonal communication that has the detailed accounting of the information that we are gathering together and examining, and also has the aspects of conflict resolution, of preventing conflict, of nourishing relationship, of supporting one another in a community context, of feeling supported by the processes that we all engage in our community context or in our family context. We need the kindness and the depth of awareness and the caring relationally with one another to be present concomitant with a journalist's detailed approach to ensuring accurate information and absorbable information. We need these to be in the same place. This is how individuals in our survivors groups have been training. We've been training ourselves and supporting one another in the self-led strengthening of our own sovereign processes so that we can have accurate information and strength of nourishment and support to assist the healing and stabilizing of living beings. We need all of that in the same place at the same time, so that instead of the people in our locations being entrained so that they can't understand us and they just don't seem to receive what we're saying, to have the information aspects of journalism journalism with integrity, and the nourishment aspect of relationality, relationships with integrity, in the same place at the same time means that survivors get to communicate using those kinds of patterns, and survivors can have a much greater opportunity to be heard than they would otherwise. They might not even be noticed otherwise. When people are entrapped or being kept in the fridge, they're being kept in trafficking situations, they're being kept available to traffickers, they're being kept from mobility that would allow them to get to safety. It is typically because they don't have access to this kind of community where we can anchor verbal patterns and understandings and cognitive processes that allow us to calmly and with love address whatever situation we're navigating. Usually people can be trafficked because they've been kept away from a resource like this, or maybe just not lucky enough to have ever encountered it. The most important part of this for us is, how do we use these principles and tool sets to resolve and prevent interpersonal conflict that could compound and result in people at particular intersections being funneled into trafficking operations. That only happens when people are squeezed into those crooks and crannies. But when we're really mindful about what's happening in our community spaces, and we're listening when someone says this is a matter of life and death, and we must effectively communicate, I can't remember how I started that sentence. It's okay. When we do this together, a lot of people I really care about don't ever need to be trafficked again. My own contact with this resource could be increased to a level where I would have relief from a lot of different kinds of violence that I'm experiencing. That's a very real, big, deep feeling for me. In any case, we have a conversation of some significance that is occurring. Thank you for participating.